Okay, this photograph was sent to me this morning by one of y'all, and in order to protect the innocent, I'm not going to mention names. I just don't think it's very polite. But I did want to give you some ideas on how I would edit this and turn it into a level 1, which is a nice photograph. Level 2 would be adding things, maybe adding seagulls, maybe putting a wharf in front. You get into compositing, you can get into sun flares coming off, all sorts of stuff. But I'll probably stick to a level 1 here and show you how I do it, just for ideas. And you might have your own ideas as well, but maybe some of these things are going to help. I'm going to use my iPhone editor before I go into Snapseed because the horizon line isn't horizontal. It's not parallel with the top, and I'm kind of a stickler about this. If I see buildings where the sides of the buildings aren't parallel with the side, unless I want to do it on purpose, I usually use a tool to straighten them or make them parallel. I am going to straighten this with my iPhone editor, and I use the horizontal lines on the grid, which are very helpful here. I back off of it and look at it, and sometimes it still doesn't visually look horizontal, and I'll go back in and change it. But this looks pretty good, so I'm going to call it done here. I'm happy with that horizon. Now I'm going to mark it and take it into Snapseed. The heart helps me identify them when I'm in Snapseed. So now I have it up here, and as I look at it, I see some things that I'd like to work on. I see a lot of grain up here in the clouds. I also consider cropping. You know, every time you start with an original size photograph, I'd say 95% of the time, by cropping it, you can make a big difference. And I may play with a crop here in this shot. In fact, I think I'll start with a crop here. This area up here is probably past 255 on the histogram, which means there isn't any information here. It's just blank. It's blown out as another term. And I may want to pull that out. I may want to crop it just because it may be more effective. I may want to crop it to get the coarseness out of it, or pixelization. Let's crop it first. I'm going to go to the free crop, which lets me crop it any way I want. And I'm going to pull this down like right about here. So you got a third of it. The sunset, and then 2/3 of it, the water. And the reason why I'm going to leave so much water here is there's a feature in it, I think, that we can have fun with. And if I didn't have all this water here, I wouldn't be able to showcase that feature. But I like this crop, so I'm going to push the check mark and save it. And now, the next thing I'm going to do is our edits that I showed you in class. Play with those. Again, there's no equation except for your eyes to determine where to stop the sliders. On the brightness, I'm going to keep an eye on the sunset because that's going to change the most. Now, if I go all the way to the right with the contrast, I'm going to really blow that light area out, and I don't want to do that. Saturation, I think we're pretty good on saturation. I may step it up. Oh, here's where it was at. If I step it up, I don't need to go too much higher before it starts looking kind of phony. I'll stop right there. Start again with ambience, round number 2. Highlights. Let's see what highlights does. Not a whole lot in this case. Warmth. We warm it up or we cool it off. Ooh, I kind of like the cooling off thing. I like the way it turns that water blue. And I've been down to the Sea of Cortez, and that water is as blue as it gets. So it isn't an unnatural color. I'm going to leave that right about here and then press the check mark. Now the next thing I want to play with, I see little highlights of orange in the water. And I wouldn't mind pulling those out a little bit. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to my accentuate filter and take a look at it. And I don't know about that. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my brush and I'm going to go to my saturation and I'm going to increase the saturation. It's on number 10 already. I want to see what happens when I use the saturation brush just on the reflections of the sunset. Now I'm going to keep an eye down here of where my navigator is because I don't want to lose track of where I am, which I probably will anyway. But I don't like to lose track because you can leave some patches undone that way. So anyway, I'm just taking my stylus, my Apple Pencil, and I'm using the saturation brush on those reflections. It doesn't seem like a whole lot of change here, but you'll notice the change when we look at it from the original view. Well, let's see what it looks like now. That brought him out a little bit, not in a real dramatic way. But I'm going to go ahead and save this guy and push the check mark and then export a copy with permanent changes. Now I'm going to go up and revert it to the very beginning and show you something else. I don't know if it did it. At this point, I might be able to pull those waves out using my accentuate at the very beginning. Yep. And I like that, and I can tell a difference. And I think this looks a lot better than the last shot. And it doesn't look phony either. And I don't mind the sunset. If the sunset's a little bit overdone, then I can go in and get my brush and I can tone it down a little bit. So I can get my saturation and decrease the saturation a little bit. And then I can go ahead and crop it. I like some of that blue up there. If you go too far down and lose some of that blue, it just doesn't look right to me. And I like that. And I'm going to save that. Now the only other thing I'd like to do is pull the grain out of the top of the sky. And here's one way you can take grain out. By going to details, structure, and going to the left. That can smooth it out. The problem here is it's smoothing out the whole image. If I were able to mask that and keep the rest of it in, then I could use that slider, but that isn't going to work. So what I would do with this, and this is going out of bounds here because I'm going to use Photoshop, but I'm going to show you how I would get rid of the grain in the clouds. So I'm going to pull up Photoshop here. I'm going to add another layer. Okay. So there's one thing about Photoshop is there's about 10 ways to do anything you want. So I guess it's based on how you feel at the time. I think I'm going to do what's called a Gaussian blur on this to see how that looks. And up here we got a blur amount. And again, we're blurring the whole thing out. But on Photoshop, I can get more specific on how I blur those clouds to where you can't see that and leave the rest of the water and the sunset untouched. Another way I can do this is by getting my smudge brush, and I can go up here and I'll make my brush a little bit bigger. And I can just go in here and manually smudge that out. One thing about clouds is they're very forgiving. You can do a lot of crazy things to them, and once you look at the original size, you might be able to tell, but viewers probably can't. They have no idea that I would go in here with a smudge brush and do this. So I think for this particular situation, the smudge brush definitely is the route to go here, and I'm pretty happy with that. Gives it kind of an artistic look, but it doesn't look unnatural either. So I would say that I'm pretty happy with this, and that I would press the save button and call it a day.